Hello. All right. Okay. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for coming to Startup Grind. Who has never been to a Startup Grind? Cool. Who's been to 8 Startup Grinds? All right, well, thank you guys so much for coming. These are run by The Conductor, which is a partnership between Startup Junkie Consulting and the University of Central Arkansas, and we exist to catalyze the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Central Arkansas. So we're really, really glad you guys are here. Startup Grind is an event we hold every month with a local influencer or investor, and we ask them about their life and business advice to create networking opportunities for you guys and learning opportunities. And so we have time at the end for Q&A, so think about what you want to ask. Jeff is an amazing, amazing person. We're so glad to have him here, so definitely think about your questions. Also, we encourage you guys to be social on Twitter and Facebook. Our Twitter handle is @AR_conductor. Facebook is just AR Conductor, and our hashtag is FullSteamAR. And we are giving away a Tacos for Life gift card to someone who tweets using hashtag FullSteamAR during the chat. So make sure you talk about what you're hearing and all the great advice from Jeff and everything like that. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Jeff Amerine is one of my very favorite people in the whole world. He's the principal of Startup Junkie Consulting. He's an entrepreneurial ecosystem builder. He's made over 80 angel investments into new ventures and small businesses. He's also an adjunct professor and teaches entrepreneurship at the University of Arkansas, Sam M. Walton College of Business, and he's just a startup champion, and you'll learn that tonight. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Jeff, can you before I start, thank you so much to the Conductor team, Edward Crockett, who is our videographer, and all of our partners. Thank you to Blue Sail for letting us occupy your space tonight. So, Jeff, tell us about yourself. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school?
You want me to start in 1962?
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay? Am I coming through all right?
I don't know if yours is on. Here, let's switch for a second.
I think I was successful in turning it off, actually. How's that? Better? Okay. So I'll kind of give it to you by the numbers, a little bit of background. 55 years old, 4 kids, married to the same woman who is here for 34 years. The best part, 4 grandkids, which is awesome. And I never really thought that I would be involved when I contemplated what career I might have when I was a kid in the startup scene. So I started out as a military brat. I traveled all over the world, did a whole bunch of different things, moved to a lot of different places, and we moved to Arkansas when my dad retired out of the Air Force, and went to junior high school and high school here, and then left. I went to the Naval Academy, spent 6.5 years in the Air Force after I graduated from the Naval Academy, 3 Fortune 500s after that, 9 startups, 7 years at university. This could be an instance where maybe I couldn't decide what I wanted to be when I grew up. I finally figured it out, and the last almost 10 years I've been involved in the local startup scene, trying to get the local startup and venture scene going.
Awesome. And can you tell us how you met Phil? Because I love this story.
Did you anybody see Officer and a Gentleman, or are you too young for that? How about Top Gun? So anyway, when I was at the Naval Academy, it was the end of my freshman year, and you're supposed to go on these summer deployments where you get on ships and you go figure out how to be a sailor and all that kind of stuff. Well, at the time, we were in some kind of shooting war in Lebanon or Syria. It sounds familiar to what we've got going on today. And they canceled that particular deployment. And so I was stuck in the dormitory there at the Naval Academy, and my roommate, who ended up many years later just recently getting out as an admiral, my roommate said, "Hey, my sponsor," and the sponsors are kind of like your surrogate parents that take care of you when you go to one of these service academies. They are great. They got a great family. They got a boat. And oh, by the way, they've got a daughter, and she's pretty awesome, and you ought to meet her. And fortunately for me, he already had a girlfriend. I think he may have had a fiance at that point. And so that's when I met Phil, and the rest is history. So I won't give any of the other details, but it's been great.
Okay. So what did you do after the Naval Academy?
So there were 4 of us in 1984 that took a commission in the Air Force rather than the Navy or the Marine Corps. And I was an intercontinental ballistic missile launch officer. So if you've seen the movie Dr. Strangelove, or you've been paying attention to what our buddy in North Korea is doing, it's a lot of that same kind of stuff. Did that for 4.5 years in Wyoming, and then I spent the last 1.5 years of my career in research and development for the Air Force.
Okay. Now, how did you transition from that into the startup world?
Unexpectedly, I guess would be the way you'd put it. So when I got out of the military, I went to work for Westinghouse, And at Westinghouse, I was a system engineer. We built communication systems for satellite systems and also for what we called PCS at the time, wireless. And I got involved in business development. And through the course of that 4 or 5 years of doing a lot of international business development, I thought, gee, I'm smart enough. I could go do this stuff on my own. Really, really bad assumption. But I went out and got involved in my first startup right after I left Westinghouse in the middle 90s.
And what was your first startup?
The very first one that I'll talk about publicly, it was a consulting company. And we did business development, new market entry. It was called FCT Consulting. We would take technologies and companies that had technologies and figure out how to get them into enterprise sales and to do other market development related activity. But I wasn't satisfied with a successful business that was going well. I decided to totally lose my mind and get into international telecommunications. So the next business, which was an operating company, was a FCC licensed international carrier where we would provide international calling services around the world.
And can you talk about what your journey was like in those companies and what happened?
It was long hours and low wages for a long time. So if you really want to make a lot of money, startups are not always the best place to do it. But what I learned along the way was some fundamentals about building a good team, about getting revenues out in front of expenses, about what to spend money on and what not to spend money on, about how to make sure that you've got good contracts in place and operating cash flows and all that kind of stuff. So it was a whole variety of lessons. The most fundamental lesson was that the team is everything. Build a great team and the team will excel. It's never really about the individual entrepreneur. It's about the kind of people they put on the team. Can you elaborate on that? Yeah.
What is it? I mean, how do you build an entrepreneurial team?
I think the first thing is if you've got to have a starting point is a really strong thought about why you're doing what you're doing. So that entrepreneurial culture or that business culture, why do you exist? What do you intend to be? What's your vision for some time frame out? What's the mission day to day? What are you going to do? And what are those core values? It sounds like a lot of sort of collegiate academic stuff. Building the right kind of culture at the outset makes all the difference. We didn't pay a lot of attention to that in a couple of these companies initially. We just thought it was all about, we're going to go sell, we're going to get it done, we're going to make a lot of money. If you don't pay attention to the culture, you'll find that it over time, it can be a corrosive thing. You don't get the kind of people you want, you don't keep the kind of people you want, you're focused on the wrong thing. So having the right culture and then hiring or firing based on that culture is really important.
Okay. Now, how did you get from that startup to Arkansas?
Yeah, so I became a little, in this ergo the name, I became a little bit of a deal junkie along the way. I found out that my place in an operating startup was really to be the person that could see the opportunity, put together the initial team, get the initial customers, get the revenue going, raise some money, but I wasn't a great operator. I needed someone that could be a really good operator. So I began to position myself in the 90s as somebody that was sort of a deal setup guy. I could get the thing going, then I would bring the operators in and I'd figure out how to make an exit. At some point or another, after doing that for a number of years, traveling around the world, the very last startup I did when I was in Maryland was a joint venture between Deutsche Telekom and SAIC to build another strategic consultancy. And we were based in Annapolis, Maryland. It was kind of a dream job. It was an awesome opportunity. We were dealing with companies from Israel and from Japan, a lot of different places. But I began to think, my parents are elderly and they're living in Arkansas, and my kids, and I had one more on the way at that point, we're only getting to see them twice a year. So after being out here to visit them in September of, I think, 2000, I did a monster board search, and I said, I wonder if there's any kind of gainful employment in North Arkansas or Northwest Arkansas that would bring me back to the state. And I was lucky enough to find a senior position with American Freightways, which became FedEx Freight, and that's what brought me back to the state. So it was a monster board story as much as anything else. I left behind the last startup that I'd worked on in Maryland, and mostly because I wanted to be closer to family.
Okay, now how did you get from Harrison up to Northwest Arkansas?
So I was there. American Freightways was a great place to work when I moved back there. It was run by the Garrison family. It was publicly traded, but it was like a $2 billion startup. We attacked the marketplace. You had a very strong culture there. It was the fastest growing less than truckload company in America from 1982 to 2000. And it was awesome working for the family. If we wanted to deploy new technology and we could build a business case, things happened very quickly. When FedEx took over, much bigger corporation, much more sort of oversight from a corporate standpoint, things slowed down a lot. And I'm not a good big organization guy. I about lost my mind in those last 2 years. So So it was one of those things where I could either figure out a way to leave or they would figure out a way for me to leave. And I won't answer which way that went, but either way, I left after 2 years of the FedEx takeover, was involved with another startup that was a venture-backed out of Silicon Valley called Conaware, and we built wireless systems for trucking companies and for service fleets. And so that was the exit from Harrison that brought me part-time over to Fayetteville.
Okay. And now, before my next question, I completely forgot, Jeff, I'm sorry. If you are in the Innovation Leadership class, Jeff Sandridge's class, meet right after the chat in room 317 in the College of Business. Right? All right. Okay. So now you're in Fayetteville.
Yep.
So talk about how does your journey then take you to entrepreneurial ecosystem building?
Well, this is another one of those things of chasing shiny objects or getting bored real easy and thinking about what I wanted to do next. So we'd done this Silicon Valley-based startup. We did what sometimes is called a lift out of the team, which was software focused, to combine with a company called Amerine out of New Zealand. Once that was complete, my fund meter was kind of pegged out on that whole deal. The fun part of the deal was done. And I really wanted to do something different. I thought at some point before I died, I wanted to teach at the collegiate level. I wanted to get involved in something completely different. So over Christmas break, and I think this would have been in 2007 timeframe, going into 2008, I looked on the University of Arkansas site, and they had a position open for a technology licensing officer. And I thought, I could probably do that. Maybe I'll send them a resume. It sounds like a fun thing to do. And I ended up getting that job. And it was sort of an individual contributor job at the time, but I thought this will be great, and it'll give me some freedom to do other things. And eventually, along the way, had an opportunity to teach entrepreneurship, which was great, and kind of got pulled into the Innovate Arkansas program shortly thereafter.
So what year was that about?
2008. That was actually October of 2008 when I got pulled into Innovate Arkansas.
Okay, so in 2008, what was entrepreneurship at that point? I mean, obviously right now it's a huge buzzword, but what was it at that time?
It was kind of a wasteland in many respects in the state, and only because, not because the potential wasn't here, but it was mostly because a lot of the big businesses in the state were still focused on geographic expansion. A lot of the investors were interested in real estate deals because it was a really overheated real estate market. And so some of the ingredients were not really there. People didn't want to know anything about scary, high-risk startups. They didn't want to know about digital anything. It was very difficult if you were in the life sciences space. It was just tough environment. And that's progressively changed over this time frame.
So how did Innovate Arkansas find you to be this champion in Northwest Arkansas?
Well, it was interesting. I'd known Ted Dickey, who was a former Stevens guy, and Mike Smith from the Arkansas Venture Forum, just a little bit. And I hadn't known Tom Dalton, but when they launched that program, which came out of Accelerate Arkansas, and it was a result of the Millikan Institute study saying that we needed to do more with technology ventures, they were doing sort of a whirlwind tour around the state, talking to the tech transfer offices at the universities. And they popped in there, and I got to know those guys, and we were talking about the technologies that were of interest and the research that was happening there. And along the way, Tom Dalton was pretty forward. He's from New York. He's not originally from Arkansas, so if you know New Yorkers, you can kind of get the sense of that. But he kind of pulled me aside, and he said, hey, why don't you quit this university thing and come work for us? And I'd been there about 6 months, and I'm like, I don't think I can do that. I do have short attention span, but I think I ought to stay with the university for a while. And I thought about it after we'd had that conversation. I went back to him and I said, how about if I stay at the university and work on this stuff on the side, and I clear it with the university to make sure it's okay, because it seems like it would be additive. It would help the university's mission, and it might be something they'd be okay with. And it was. And so it began as this sort of side hustle while I was at the university that grew into what became Startup Junkie and all that followed.
So, I mean, looking back, that was a hugely pivotal moment. I mean, in your life and honestly, the life of Arkansas's entrepreneurial ecosystem. So, I mean, what did you do from that point?
I tried to find more hours in the day, for starters, because I was getting to the point where I had 3 full-time jobs. What we were doing with tech transfer, teaching a little bit, and then with Innovate Arkansas. And it's like any other entrepreneurial pursuit. If you're opportunistic, if you figure out a way to say yes to things that you can actually do, then good things will happen. And so I didn't turn down many opportunities that made sense to me. And as we started to build that Innovate Arkansas thing, there were people in Northwest Arkansas that were at the Northwest Arkansas Council, which is sort of the super chamber up there. And they said, well, we'd like to see more breadth and depth built up here around an angel fund, around an angel networking group, around pitch contests and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, sure, I can do that. I didn't know how I was going to do that and everything else, but I said, we'll figure out a way to do that. And so we got a group of people together, and we got stuff going in Northwest Arkansas as well. And one thing led to another, and then we applied for funding to run the ARC Challenge Accelerator up there, which was the first accelerator in the state. There was federal funding. So it was one thing led to another, and it was a large group of people that I happened to have the good fortune of sort of being in the center of. I mean, this was not anything I did personally. It was something that I helped to try to catalyze, but it was a lot of people involved that could see the benefit of having small businesses and startups growing in the state.
So thinking about starting this ecosystem from scratch, basically,
Right.
when entrepreneurship just wasn't really a thing.
Right.
I mean, what were you doing? Just sort of, what was your pitch to people?
Well, the pitch to most people, even still today, if they're not sure what they can do, if they're in a corporate setting or they want to find out, is about 80% of life is showing up. So part of the pitch was, if we have an event, just show up. I guarantee you're going to meet someone there you didn't know you needed to know, and you might learn a few things along the way. So part of it was just convincing people to show up. A good example of that was when we first came up with the G60 elevator pitch contest, which was totally inspired by the elevator pitch that they do at the Governor's Cup Collegiate Business Plan competition during the banquet. I said, but it's only once a year. We need to be doing this every month, every week, somewhere. And I wrote a blog about it. And so I said, well, okay, we're going to figure out how to pull this off. And so got a bunch of the younger entrepreneurs together, and we went to this sort of dilapidated barbecue place up there. We said, we're going to have a pitch contest, and we're going to give a couple of $1,000 prizes. And I figured we'd pull this off, and it might be 10 or 15 of the usual suspects. And we had like 200 people show up at this barbecue joint. I think it was the biggest amount of sales they'd ever had there. And we were so sophisticated at the time, we'd forgotten to bring a screen for the projector, so we had to use a tablecloth off of one of the tables on the windows. And it was a cappella, right? We didn't have an AV system, so it was like I was having to shout like I was on a ship or a submarine to communicate. But it worked, and that became kind of a regular thing where people came out. And part of it was, the key that we've learned as much as anything else is, before you spend money on the heavy infrastructure and the capital equipment and the spaces and whatnot, if you can get the community going by having a regular cadence of events and activities, that's the place to start, because you build the demand. So we started having that kind of stuff all the time, every couple of weeks.
Okay, and so how did you then transition into doing Startup Junkie full time?
So again, this is sort of an accidental business, and I was kind of kicking and screaming. I didn't want to have another legal entity. It seemed like a big headache. I was just sort of Schedule C on my tax as a sole proprietorship when it was a side hustle. And Winrock, to their credit, being a big organization, kind of a multinational nonprofit, they said, listen, you're a knucklehead. You need to have a legal entity. Go get an LLC. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I know that I need to do that. And so I registered an LLC, a limited liability company with the state, and I wanted to call it something mundane like, Amerine Ventures or Amerine Consulting. But it turns out I had a cousin that has my same last name that already had that name. So I was thinking, I've got to name it something else. And so, all right, what am I going to do? And I was inspired by this radio show that I used to listen to a lot when I was in the D.C. area called the Sports Junkies. And it was these sort of oddball guys that would get on the radio and they talk about Redskin sports, and they were just irreverent and joking around, a little bit sarcastic. And I thought, okay, they're sports junkies. What am I? I'm a startup junkie. So that was the beginning of the name, Startup Junkie Consulting. But it was really this idea of capturing the fact that there's people that are constantly dissatisfied with the status quo. They want there to be change, economic change. They want to build something new. And that's kind of the way I always felt about what I had pursued. When I was most happy, it was when I was pursuing a new idea or trying to commercialize something.
So did that satisfy your need for needing to do different things your restlessness that you encountered in your other jobs? Was that satisfied in Startup Junkie?
It's the job that took me 35 years to get to that I always needed. So all the rest of the way was sort of this process to get me to the point of exactly where I needed to be, which was in this sort of consulting, coaching, mentoring, catalytic role. The thing I love best about what we do is it's never just one kind of company we deal with. One day we'll be dealing with a company that's working on nanomaterials. The next day it's medical devices. The next day it's food or beverage. So it's constant stimulation across a whole bunch of different kinds of companies. And for me, that's the most fun. And then getting to work with amazing people like Kim and Jeff and Glenn and Keaton and the whole team.
Okay, so talk about what Startup Junkie does then.
So Startup Junkie Consulting is it's interesting management consulting model. It's like McKinsey or KPMG or Ernst & Young. It's in many respects exactly like that. The difference is all of our services are completely free. So, and you think about that and you're like, what a stupid business model. Who would ever do that? And I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. It's a terrible idea. Don't do it. But the reason why it's worked for us is because we've been able, through this process that we do of convincing third parties, like the Walton Family Foundation, like the University of Central Arkansas, the Small Business Administration, the City of Fayetteville, EDA, Department of Commerce EDA, that the best return on investment for economic development dollars is towards trying to bolster small business and startups. Because as it turns out, over the course of the last 20 years, somewhere between 2 out of every 3 and 85% of all net new jobs come from small business and startups. And the other piece, which doesn't get talked about enough, is that most of the new innovation and the competitive advantage that occurs for big businesses is coming from startups because they've got the agility and the cost structure to do things more quickly. So, did I answer your question or I just ramble on?
No, that was perfect.
That felt like a political answer there. I'm not running for governor. So.
No. We'll talk about, so Jeff, you are being so humble because I'll tell you, as long as I've been in even the periphery of entrepreneurship, your name has been at the center of it as someone who really started entrepreneurship in Arkansas. I mean, when I started Startup Grind, you're the first person I thought of to be a speaker. So, I mean, talk about, something I love about you is how altruistic you are, and I know that you do things because you know it's the right thing to do.
Right.
But can you talk about the power of giving back and how you think that's sort of shaped this movement?
Yeah, and so it's interesting. So 2 of my favorite books that kind of informed some of that, and I was never able to really put a finger on it. It's not necessarily a spiritual thing, but I believe it's important. Adam Grant wrote this book called Give or Take, and he did an analysis. He's a Wharton professor, but he did this analysis of the kind of success people had where they figure out how to help the other person first without thinking about what sort of reciprocity or what's in it for them as part of the equation. So they're not transactional. And so when I started thinking about a lot of the things we do, an awful lot of what we did, we would help people, we would try to move people down the road just to see them succeed without any concern about what sort of percentage would be in it for us. And so I think that informs the culture that we've tried to build with Startup Junkie. I mean, our purpose is to inspire and educate through innovation and entrepreneurship to improve lives around the world. That's what we try to do every day. That's the whole reason why we exist. So I think it's super important to try to be helpful first and not worry about what's in it for you.
And do you think that you're improving lives?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I think, so what's the measure of that? Some of it's anecdotal, people, where you can see companies like RevUnit would be a good example. These are 2 guys that would have built a great business anyway, but they started that company working out of the Bentonville Library. They now employ 100 people. When we see those sorts of things, and I don't mean to, I'm not in any way taking credit for that, but we can help be catalytic in getting companies like that past the friction points that typically cause them to fail at an early stage. So if we can be just a little bit catalytic, just a little bit of an impetus to get them to do something they might not otherwise do, and then seeing them succeed, there's a lot of satisfaction out of that. So I think we are. And
can you also talk about, on that note, the power of collaboration, and I think the Conductor is a great example of that, but how has that shaped this ecosystem?
It's hugely important. So the temptation, particularly when you've got an interesting business model like we do, is to be a little bit parochial about, we kind of got ours and we don't want to talk to anybody else because they might represent competition. We've come around to the idea that we'll collaborate with anyone who will collaborate with us, because what we're trying to do in building this innovation entrepreneurial scene is an all-hands-on-deck type of undertaking. We need everybody engaged with us. There's too much to do and too few of us involved. So what that means is working with great universities like UCA and getting the cooperation we have with them, having great supporters in the Conway Chamber, for example. The level of alignment and cooperation in Conway in particular, if you were to look statewide, is amazing. Between the business leaders and the chamber, Conway Development Corporation, this place is unusual. It's something in the DNA here that ought to be modeled. We tried to do the same thing in Northwest Arkansas as well, just to try to get all those little Friday night lights issues between Fayetteville and Springdale and Rogers and Bentonville set aside and get all those people working together, because it's too small of an area
with too much to do for people to kind of try to build their own kingdoms. Awesome. So can you talk a little bit about the power of innovation and entrepreneurship and how this can impact lives? Yeah. So the idea of entrepreneurship or innovation, you think, well, that's a startup thing and there's some romantic aspect to it. It's really more of a mindset to say, in a big company, how can you figure out how to capture some of that, the startup way of doing things, where you move quickly and you quickly iterate and you figure out what you need to test to remove risk from something, and there's this tolerance for risk that you are allowing innovators within the larger company context to take risk and to occasionally fail and then to quickly improve from what they learn. So what we're trying to do now, and actually Jeff Stanrich is right at the center of this, is to take some of these lessons that we've learned that work well in the startup scene and go back into large companies and say, hey, if you want to stay ahead, if you want to have competitive advantage, if you want to improve, here's how you can take some of that startup mindset and incorporate it into the way you do new product or service development. Sure. Okay, cool. So talk a little bit about your work as an angel investor. And especially I want to talk about teams and leadership here, and you touched on that a little bit, but can you talk about sort of holistically what you're looking for as an investor and your experience in that realm? Well, first thing is, does anybody in the crowd know where the term angel investor come from? Have you ever heard where it came from? So apparently back when they used to finance plays, and I'm totally stealing this from Permjot Value, our friend from the UK and from Canada, but he said apparently when they were financing plays in the days of Shakespeare, they needed to get money from somewhere. And what they said at the time is, you give this money and this play will happen and you'll get your reward in the afterlife. So angel investor. And there's plenty of days when a lot of us in this room feel like we may get the reward in the afterlife, or we may have a hot place to sit depending upon the bets that we make. But what we've learned, and I've been at this now pretty actively since 2010, is a good investment starts and finishes with the quality of the team. So the very first thing you check out is, are these smart people? Are they working well together? Is it a good team dynamic? That's the very first point of consideration. The next thing is you think about it from a risk management standpoint. So the team is the first piece. The second thing will be the financial aspect. How much capital they need? Is it super capital intensive? Do they have a clear view of what this can be? How well capitalized are they, and how much money do they need? Then we'll think about product or technology. What sort of risk are associated with the product or technology? Are there a bunch of hurdles they've got to get over? Is it something that's viable? And then you're going to think about market and customer. Do they have traction? Are they actually selling something? Those are the four main pillars. There's other things we'll look at, but you kind of go through a checklist of things to see, do they have a chance of actually getting this to market? And the companies that we've bet on that have done well are the ones that tend to develop an encyclopedic understanding of their position in their market and how to execute. Ideas are commodities. A good idea is not going to go anywhere, but good execution will take a business to the next level. So finding those leadership teams to invest in that are really solid in the way they think about execution and managing milestones and communication with their investors and their customers is what has worked well. So if someone today wants to start a company, how do they begin building their team? Well, I'd say the first thing is, so if you're a founder and you're thinking about doing something, write down all the things. If you can write down all the things that you think you need to do to run that business, think about all the functions of the business, and then write your name next to all of those functions that you love doing, the things you're good at and that you love doing. And where there are things that you're not good at and you don't love doing, then you either outsource it or you find a co-founder to help you. This is too hard to do by yourself most of the time. Solo founders first of all, you're going to feel alone, and secondly, you really need to think about having someone with complementary skills, not a buddy, not a friend, somebody that's going to challenge you, that will have complementary or different skills, the kind of person that can do the things that you don't like to do. Now, if someone was wanting to start their business today, what aside from the team building aspect, what's the first thing they should do, and especially in the financing realm? Well, I said the very first thing, if they want to start something, is they ought to go through an assessment as to whether or not they're solving a problem that anyone really cares about. So where we will typically send people out is we'll say, here's the lean startup methodology. This is what the lean canvas looks like. Go out and do some really good customer development to find out,
is this a problem that anyone really cares about, and would they pay for it? So the guidance we give is talk to 100 people that are not family members or friends and ask them really good open-ended questions that avoid that confirmation bias. You want to avoid having people give you the answers that you want. You have to kind of divorce yourself from the love you have of your own ideas and be sort of mercenary about listening to what the market tells you. That's the very first step. And if they do a good job in that customer development, then they're going to have an easier time the rest of the way.
And if they, okay, so let's talk about a company that you've worked with, and not specifically, but who is years down the road, and maybe they never did the customer discovery, and but it's obvious that it's not going to work. So what advice do you give them at that point?
Wow. Change your name, go to another country? No, that's terrible. Sorry. I think you got to constantly be figuring out ways to pivot. So even if you've gone a long way and you've spent a lot of money, you never necessarily have to give up. You just really open your mind to which direction can this business go that's different than what I imagined. So a good example of a pivot that can occur is there was a company that grew out of the University of Arkansas here, started by a guy named Ryan Fraser, called DataRank. And DataRank was a social listening platform to where initially they were saying we can predict better than the Wall Street analyst what the earnings are going to be for these 100 publicly traded retail and apparel firms. That was specifically what they focused on. And they could. I mean, at one point when we initially talked to them and we were thinking of investing, we said, don't tell anybody about this. We're going to create a hedge fund because this will give you an edge. But they really wanted to go to market to sell this as a tool to day traders and brokers and other folks. What they figured out along the way was that nobody from Wall Street wanted to talk to anybody from Arkansas about anything having to do with financial stuff. I mean, it was like the phone calls kind of went like this. Who are you and how the hell did you get my number? Click. And so what they did instead was they pitched one night at the Natural State Angel Association, and there was a guy in the audience who was the customer insights director for Procter & Gamble. And he listened to their presentation. He was a very intuitive guy. And he said, well, if you could do that for financial services, you could also do that for consumer packaged goods, right? To give us that kind of insight and that intel so that we know what the customers are saying and what they want to do about a certain product. And within 2 weeks, DataRank had built something that was targeted for these consumer packaged goods companies, and their first customer was Procter & Gamble. So that was a case where they'd gone a long way. They'd built the tech. They'd already raised some investment, and they found out the market they were heading towards wasn't going to make any sense. So it's never too late to pivot. You know, entrepreneurs never really run out of money. They just run out of time. And think about that for a minute. I mean, they do run out of money, but the point is they didn't get down the road far enough finding a business model fit before they ran out of money. That's the whole idea. Now, in DataRank's case, they did.
So, and to follow up on pivoting,
sure.
How often do you think a business should reevaluate their mission and goals and how well they've executed things? And because it's easy to get stale.
It is. Well, I think you need to. So there's this, as companies get bigger, there's this sort of constant push-pull between the need to be innovative and the need to take care of existing customers through operational excellence, through improving how you deliver. I think that it needs to be kind of a constant process of reinvention, because particularly today, when I first got into technology in the late 1980s and early 1990s, an enterprise would buy a piece of capital equipment and they would depreciate it over maybe 10 to 15 years. And so the product life cycles were long enough that it was a manageable process. Today, a lot of this stuff, the technology is a lot less expensive, and it's been commoditized to the extent that those product life cycles are really short. So as a business, any kind of business, you need to constantly realize somebody in a garage somewhere is working to eat your lunch. And so you better figure out how to have at least a portion of your team thinking about what's coming next. And you can do that either through internal innovation and new product creation or through acquisition. But I think you got to be doing that on a regular basis all the time.
Now, let's talk about failure for a second as well.
Yep.
So what is your advice in that regard, and is failure a bad thing?
Failure is part of the game. And here, I'll give you a little bit of context on that too. So people realize that the startup failure rate is really high, and anybody that's done more than one startup, unless you're just amazing and really lucky, and even those who are, have probably failed more than they've succeeded. Most ventures fail, either because the market conditions are wrong, or the team was wrong, or the product was wrong, or whatever the case may be. The key is to figure out how to embrace what you learned and to not make those same mistakes the next time around. Failure, there's going to be lots of failures on the pathway towards success. And I think it's Mark Cuban says you only have to be right one time, because he failed a lot before he got it right with the big exit that he had during the telecom boom. So you got to embrace failure. That's part of it. The whole lean startup process is all about failing fast and iterating. So proving or disproving your assumptions about a business without spending a lot of money. For some of the early failures that I had, and I had a few, we spent a ton of money and then failed, and it was really, really painful. What you want to do is make small iterations as you're going through to test your ideas as quickly and as efficiently as you can, and then to improve upon those as you go.
And what's the moment when you're consulting with people, and when do you say, okay, this is it's time to do something else? And when do you say, keep pivoting, keep trying, doing something else?
What was it that W.C. Fields said about that? I don't know. I mean, there's a quote on that, is eventually you don't want to be a damn fool, right? I mean, you want to just move on from it. But I think it's, if you've got enough market validation that you're not able to sell, your monthly recurring revenues are not increasing, people are not buying your product, or the sales cycle is so long that it's untenable, then you got to change the picture. You've got to figure out, how can I repurpose what I have? So I think part of that is typically indicated by the economics. If you don't get to a point where you're in the black, eventually it's not a business. You've got to get to break even as quickly as possible in a business, or at least where you're in a position where if you wanted to be profitable, you could. There may be instances where you continue to pour money in because you're trying to gain market share. But if you don't get to that point where your sales are not increasing on a regular basis, it may be time to look to do something else. And I will say, though, the one caveat I'll give is, if you're in something like a life sciences or a biotech, you may never get to sales. There's other milestones that you use in those kind of industries. For conventional businesses, you got to get to the point where you're covering your costs and where the business is growing. And most good businesses start and finish with sales. If sales aren't working, nothing else will work well either.
So let's talk about success now.
Okay.
So what's a successful ecosystem? What does it look like to you? And what are your goals for the ecosystem in Arkansas?
So a successful ecosystem is not to be some kind of replicant of Silicon Valley, because there's only one Silicon Valley. So whenever these regions say, we're going to be the Silicon Slopes, we're going to be the Silicon Alley, I mean, it's a bunch of Silicon BS, right? They need to be their own best, whatever it is that they can be in a given area. So when we got tempted to say, oh, we're going to be the Silicon this or that up there where we are, we're like, forget it. Let's just be the best Northwest Arkansas we can be. But what success means is when you've got these four main pillars that are really solid, and that is, you're doing a good job on talent development, attraction, and retention. That's both technology talent, but it's just founder talent in general. You've got this supply of people that are willing to get out and try to build ventures. The other thing is, you've got to have capital available from angel stage, from seed stage, very early, all the way through private equity. And you've got to have debt and debt alternatives available as well, because equity is not the only game. The third pillar is entrepreneurial culture. So coming out to events like this, having these sorts of events nearly every day somewhere in the state, to where this becomes part of the fabric of the community. People get comfortable coming out to these sorts of meetings. And then the final thing is when you begin to get community, institutional, and flagship industry engagement, where the large established players realize it's in their economic long-term best interest to engage with the startup community, because that's where some of the best ideas and the talent are going to come from. If you get all that, those in kind of in harmony, then you've got a viable ecosystem.
And what do you think will happen here in the next 5 or 10 years?
I think there's a lot of upside. Particularly in certain areas within Arkansas, I think there's a lot of upside. I think Conway's future is particularly bright because of the amazing alignment you have, and the fact that you've got a great university here, which is more than one great university here, which is the basis for that talent pool. I'm optimistic. I think if we continue to be very focused around the things that the state is good at, like fintech, like data analytics and decision science, like cybersecurity, like retail and retail tech, consumer packaged goods, supply chain, I think all those things are great. I think we can also do some pretty amazing things within health tech and healthcare, just because of research institutions we have here. So if we build on those strengths, I've got news for everybody here. We're not going to create the next successful Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn here. That's not the place that should be created. Somebody will prove me wrong, and I'll have to eat crow about that maybe. But that'd be all right. But what I'm saying is, let's play to our strengths. We have a ton of talent in all these other areas. Let's build great businesses. For me, what I'd like to see in 20 years is $100 million a year businesses in this state that maybe grew out of the subject matter expertise we have from those existing clusters we have, but that aren't directly tied to a Walmart, a J.B. Hunt, a Tyson, a Murphy Oil, an Axiom, but they've leveraged that talent that was already here.
Okay, and can you also talk a little bit about the regionalism of entrepreneurship and how this does put Arkansas on the map? I mean, I don't think it's even a stretch to say that at all. And the work you've done in this region outside of Arkansas.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's been a long struggle. We used to say, "Thank God for Mississippi." At least we're not dead ass last on every list that anybody would want to measure. And if anybody's from Mississippi, I apologize, but I just it's one of those things. Now we can legitimately say, yeah, U.S. News and World Report did a ranking, and this region within Arkansas is in the top 5 in this category. This region has, the most women and minority-owned businesses, or second or third in the country. So, I mean, there's some of those measures where we're starting to come out on national lists. We have a lot more work to do, but just being mentioned in that conversation is good. I'll give you another good example of an indicator. Steve Case is the guy that founded AOL. He's done Revolution Ventures. He's got this program called The Rise of the Rest. And it always kind of pissed me off, the name, quite honestly, because it feels like, well, if you're on the coast, you're like in the genius class, and we're the rest, But he at least acknowledges that some of the best ideas and ventures are coming out of the middle of the country. So the Rise of the Rest is actually sending a delegation here tomorrow to talk about having a major event in the state. It'll probably be in Northwest Arkansas this first time through, to bring this $150 million seed investment fund that Steve Case and the Waltons and others have invested in to potentially invest in deals here. That's something we never would have seen 5 or 10 years ago. So the fact that we're even in that conversation is pretty interesting.
All right, we're going to open it for questions, but I have one more for
Sure.
you. And this is something that we just talk about a lot, and I always try to ask in these chats, but I'm particularly interested in your answer. Work-life balance. But, well, I want to hear what you have to say, but since you're so passionate, and I think there's probably a lot of crossover for you.
Yeah, do you want to come to the mic?
But what do you think?
Well, there is no work-life balance if you're an entrepreneur, and what that means is it's going to be all work, and that's going to be integrated into your life. That becomes an integral part of it. It's part of the DNA. So you either get really lucky and marry someone and have a family that understands that's just who you are, or you're going to be really unhappy, because it's hard to separate that. Now, that said, that doesn't mean you're working 24/7, but it means you wake up in the morning, you're thinking about it. When you go to bed at night, you're thinking about it. For me, it was an exciting thing. It was like constant problem solving, and what are we going to chase next? There was a lot of adrenaline associated with it, so it felt very natural. It took me a long time to figure out that since I couldn't be an astronaut and I wasn't going to be a fighter pilot, that this was the kind of thing that gave you the same sort of adrenaline rush that you might get from those sorts of activities. So what you'll find is that you go full out. It's like an interval race, and you're going crazy and you're working like mad, and then you have to take the time off to recharge. So you can't go continuously at full speed. So the only time it's not ever really balanced, it's more like a sine wave, where you're going like crazy, and then you're taking a breather, and you're catching your breath, and then you're going like crazy again. It's a lot of interval training. So it's a 50-mile run where you're running 6 minutes and walking 2 for 50 miles. How's that?
That's perfect. And I have one more I wanted to ask earlier. Talk about the family aspect of Startup Junkie. It's one of my favorite parts of it, honestly. How did that happen?
Yeah, nepotism is alive in the Startup Junkie team, so we'll just go right there and say that. So Phyllis and I, my wife and I, were the original co-founders of Startup Junkie. We worked on it together, and we've worked in a lot of businesses together. And at one point, when I was helping run the Gravity Fund, my daughter, who's an Air Force lawyer and Air Force JAG, was actually doing some of the fund management stuff for us, the administration. So family's always been important to me. I never had the opportunity to work with my dad in a business because he was a military guy, and as time went on and Startup Junkie started to become a thing, I needed somebody that I knew I could trust, that would be able to be very methodical and process-driven to be our director of operations, our COO. My son, who at the time was an Air Force officer and he was a contracting officer, had project management skills. I kind of made him an offer he couldn't refuse. I said, hey, how about you come back and do this stuff? You can do all the inside, kind of get the processes in place and make sure we're getting paid, and I'll work to help build the business. And it worked out well. I knew I could trust him. I remembered him when he was brand new and when he was 3 years old. And there's times when you have to kind of get over that. When you're in the business, it's sort of founder and COO versus father and son. But it's been super important to us. It hasn't always been easy, but we've figured a way through it. And to the credit of the other people that are in the business with us, it's not one of these things where you always got to wonder who's the relative in charge. And I've been in businesses like that. It's sort of a dialogue of equals. Brett and I don't agree on a lot of things. Sometimes Brett and Jeff might agree on something and they'll have to sway me, but there's a collegiality that has to develop amongst the team to where it doesn't matter who you're related to, you're going to make the best decision based on the information you have. But family's a big part of it. I'd hire them all if they wanted to work for me. And the grandkids too, because they're good entertainment.
Perfect. Okay, we're going to open up for questions. I think I made you guys a couple minutes late. Yes?
So you touched on this a little bit about using this think like a startup and innovation and entrepreneurship in the large company. We have a number of folks here who are nonprofits, state institutions,
Yep.
small state agencies, institutions of higher ed and what have you. Talk specifically about the value of this approach in that environment.
So really the whole lean startup mindset, that approach to innovation and really kind of design thinking, it's all it is what we all learned in the 5th grade. It's the scientific method. You go into any issue that you want to take on, whether it's a new project, a new market opportunity, with the idea that you're going to challenge all of your assumptions and figure out a methodical way to test and quickly learn what's going to work and what's not going to work. So if you're in a nonprofit and you want to take on a new project or a new initiative, that lean canvas methodology will work just as well for an existing nonprofit that wants to roll something new out as it would for a new venture or a new business. Same for a large corporation. You got a new product, a new service you want to roll out. Use that same methodology and that same thinking to figure out, is this really going to make sense? Is this solving a problem that customers really would pay for? How do we know? And gathering the evidence associated with that. I think that's the whole bit of it. A lot of times we want to try to assign that to it's all about new ventures. It's not. It's any new product or service any company or nonprofit would want to deploy.
Will you tell me the value of free marketing?
The value of free marketing. The value. Ask the question again. The value of free marketing may be 0, depending on who's doing it.
So, in this day and age, we have Facebook.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yep. Yeah.
Facebook, word of mouth, things like that.
Sure.
That value in a startup versus not marketing on those.
I get your question. It's huge. Earned media and social media and anything that you can do, that whole world has been democratized. So since we've got ease of access to where somebody can get a bunch of Instagram followers or a bunch of people to follow them on Twitter or a LinkedIn or whatever it is, hugely valuable if you know to do it well. So long as you use the principle of I'm going to be helpful to that constituency or that audience first, and I'm not going to try to sell them something. So the trick to that, in my opinion, is become a thought leader by providing useful information that may or may not be directly tied to trying to sell someone a new product or service. Then you get the following. You establish that credibility. The other thing that's part of that is earned media. If you start to be recognized as somebody the press can call because you'll talk to them and you'll say meaningful things that might be relevant to something they want to cover without trying to sell them on something, you'll get a ton of earned media. So newspaper articles, TV stations, all that kind of stuff. Do that to the maximum extent possible before you ever pay for any advertising. I think it's huge.
What do you think about paying someone for SEO, even in a startup?
I think that's not a bad idea if you've qualified that group and if they've got a good track record and if they're familiar with what you're trying to do. That might not be particularly if you don't know anything about SEO, SEM type of stuff. It wouldn't be bad to have the expertise to help you. Yes, sir.
Jared Lincoln, what would you say to a young business development manager who's trying to figure out how to take his small local business to big time level?
So first of all, good on you. I think that's the way to think. And what I would say is find someone that's in a similar business that has gone from a small local operation to regional or national scale. So if you can, and we can probably maybe even help you find the mentors that you're looking for, but having the mentorship of someone that has taken that journey in a similar market segment than what you're in is hugely valuable. Now, the key to that is some of them may be inclined to say, this is my playbook and this is how I did it. So your job in a small business is to talk to enough people and to provide a good founder filter so that you can listen to what they said and then synthesize the key things that you think are going to be meaningful for your business. But talk to as many people as you can that have successfully gone on that journey. You bet. Yeah.
I'm Robert Addison. I started a company last summer. It's kind of a catering coffee business.
Uh-huh.
Event planning type stuff. I'm signing events all the time. I'm in a new city almost every week.
Yeah.
Or wherever. The biggest hurdle I've come across is with the colleges and stuff like that. You've got a company called Amerine, which has a stranglehold on what you can do.
Mm-hmm.
I can go to UCA downtown.
Yeah.
Work with them. They've approached me about doing events and stuff like that. We do a great job, but we run into that. I'm happy to reach these students in the same way. Like a lot of my business is referral based. You see us, you like us. That social media that he was talking about transfers to referral based word of mouth, which would
Right.
anyway.
Right.
How do we get around Airmark?
Yeah, it's a good question. Or Chartwells, or all of them that are involved in the food service. I may not have a great answer for you on that. I would say, one way is you could figure out how to partner with them. If there's something unique you're doing, then think about using them for the food service. So they're still getting their cut of the action, and they've got scale so that you can go bigger, and you're not representing a threat. So partnering with them might be one way to look at it. You may not make as many points of margin, but remember, they've got scale. So if you can figure something out that can add to their mix, they can take you a lot of other places than just here, possibly. Yeah, you bet.
Other questions?
Sure.
Throughout your entrepreneurship journey,
Mm-hmm.
you might have come to a cross where there is a point where you have to talent acquisition.
Mm-hmm.
And between that, you might find people with great talents but costing more.
Mm-hmm.
And you might have come to a point where you might want to learn that technical skills throughout your entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
How do you balance between the cost and also the talent that is provided?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's you need really. So first of all, I would say the first 5 people that you get in any new start are going to set the foundation for everything else you do. You would hope that you have people early on that are willing to work for a little less than market rate. And the way that you can sometimes get that really good, high quality people for less than a market rate is you have them on a equity or equity option vesting plan over a period of years. So it's non-dollar compensation that's tied to the growth of the business. That's a way to do it. That's the way it happens in Silicon Valley all the time. Otherwise, a startup would be paying $250,000 a year for local software development talent. They knock that down a little bit in the early days by getting people that are bought in on what's going to happen in the backside of the venture when they get to the point that they're able to sell to someone else. That said, you can't build a great business with average talent. So you got to go find the best people you can find and hope that you as the founder can convince them that it's worth the ride, getting paid a whole lot less than what they'd get in a larger company. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but with that, do you think getting job done is more important than pushing the cost low, or how do you balance that? Do you think getting job done is very important?
You got to get the job done. I mean, as a startup, you're not going to win competing based on price or lower cost. You're going to win, particularly if you're selling to enterprise, by having something that's 10 times better than what the relevant competition can do. You got every disadvantage you can imagine in a startup, aside from the fact that you can go quick and you can maybe do something better and a whole lot better, hopefully, than what the large competitors have. But you can't do that with average talent typically. You got to have really, really the best people you can find at the outset.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm Leslie. I am with the Secretary, and I just want to say that at the very, very beginning, before we
And congratulations on your progress. You bet.
Maybe past the first year in restaurants, you're like, anyway, the first one is about team development. You kind of touched on that.
Mhm.
What questions do you ask to get the right people on your team and to kind of keep them there to keep that retention rate? And the second question is more about like legal structure. So if you want to have a nonprofit for alcohol reasons, how do you structure that in terms of do you have to for-profit LLC own the nonprofit, or what kind of structure? How do you set that up?
That's a good question, and I'm not a lawyer on that particular point. So, and I'm not going to practice law tonight, but I will tell you, you can certainly have a nonprofit if it's got a specific social mission. The thing you have to be careful of if you have both is to avoid the appearance or the reality of self-dealing. So you can't, for example, funnel funds through the nonprofit to the for-profit in some kind of way that looks like you're just using the nonprofit for a shell. You've got to be very true to that mission of the nonprofit. You also will want to have a completely independent board of directors and probably an executive director that are independent of anything that happens on the for-profit side to keep you on the straight and narrow. So that's that point. And what was your other question about? Oh, so if you start with that definition of your culture, come up with questions that speak to is this somebody that's going to align with the reason why we exist, our purpose? Is this somebody that gets our vision? Is this somebody that's going to be able to operate against our core values, whatever those are, however you define them? Use that cultural definition. That's not just an academic exercise. It's something that's got to come from your heart that you really believe in. Use that as the basis of the questions you ask. And then the other thing I'd say too is on service businesses, it can be tough, particularly if you're talking about minimum wage or a little higher than minimum wage. The churn and the business you're in can be really difficult. But I think that if you have that right kind of culture, the best people within the service business are going to gravitate towards you. They're going to want to work there because it's going to be an environment where they're going to want to spend their time. So have questions that align to the culture that you believe in and that you define. That's the way Justin George at Apogee, he talks about how they had to go through 3 different iterations. They're an educational technology company in Little Rock. 3 different iterations of their culture to get to the point where he and the other founders were really comfortable that they could hire or fire someone or reward someone on the basis of that culture. So use that as your North Star.
All right, one more question. Jessica? Yeah.
So you're obviously an amazing consultant because of your experience. Do you recruit other consultants for your?
There's 18 of us. How did it was good luck as much as anything else. Yeah, some of all of that. So I'll give you an example. Some people came to the team like Jeff Stanrich, who yeah, exactly. I mean, well known, a lot of experience, sort of senior executive. It had done a whole bunch of things. And in Kim, the same way. He's been successful at the Innovation Hub and whatnot. There are other members of our team who started out as interns, for example. So Haley Allgood, who is the executive director of our foundation, I had her in class. What I looked for the young talent was people that were natural problem solvers and had good interpersonal skills and were undaunted by the variety of different things that walk in the door. So sometimes Michael Eisman or Haley will describe themselves as Swiss Army knives because of the different things that we have to deal with. And people that enjoy that type of environment. So that's who I look for. And then along the way, they want to be constant learners. So they're constantly, Kim is a great example of this. She's constantly trying to figure out how to improve, how to learn more, how to get better. I think we have people in our group that are natural entrepreneurs. So they're constantly thinking about what can we do next that will be better and will improve the service we offer or that we can launch so that we can learn something more about a given segment. So I'm looking for entrepreneurs that love the environment of dealing with other entrepreneurs. And that's kind of the Swiss Army knives, I guess, the short answer.
Awesome. All right, we're going to wrap it up. So
Okay.
we end all these with the same question. What is one piece of business advice you would leave us with today?
Buy low and sell high. How's that? Yeah, that's not very compelling. No, I mean, sorry, that was trite. I would say the one thing is you're never too young. Sophie Overton, who's one of the 4 or 5 time winners of the Idea Fame Live contest is 12 years old. She's launched a company called Wise Pocket Products, and it's their socks with pockets. That thing's going to market. She's 12 years old. You're never too young, and you're never too old to pursue this venture that you always wanted to start. So don't give up, don't give in, and just keep grinding away. It's possible. And the other thing I'll say is that there's a lot of us who are here to help you, who have been on the journey that you want to undertake. All you got to do is ask and show up to these types of events, and good things will happen.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff. I was just sitting here thinking that my introduction to entrepreneurship was covering the ARC Challenge as a journalist, which would not have existed without you. We would not be sitting here. We would not be sitting here without you. So you have made a humongous impact in the state, and it's an honor to work with you. So thank you so much for coming. Oh, we have a winner. Do we have a winner, Keaton, for Tacos for Life? Chris Baker. All right. Thank you for tweeting.
Does he get Tacos for Life?
He gets a gift card to Tacos for Life.
I mean, it should actually get a store. Are we giving away franchises? No. All right.
Thank you guys for coming. We have these every single month. Our website is arconductor.org, where you can see all of our events. Next door is our makerspace. Everything we offer is free, so you can go use the makerspace for free. Our consulting is free. Come see us. You can set up a meeting with Jeff Standridge. We do multiple meetings a day with entrepreneurs. So come see us. Thank you guys for coming, and we will see you next time. And thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Kim.